Welcome to Resilience Development in Action with Steve Bisson. This is the podcast dedicated to first responder mental health, helping police, fire, EMS, dispatchers, and paramedics create better growth environments for themselves and their teams. Let's get started.
Well, welcome back. And Kemmi Sadler, you're back again. Okay, well, we already said that we'd be back anyway. Just wanted to finish up a little bit on the identity. One of the biggest factors that I find people do is that becoming a civilian is like a dirty word. And we talked about that in the previous episode, but I really feel like it's not about being a dirty word, being a civilian, but that loss of identity, not having that badge. Do you feel like you're losing the club, so to speak? Are you losing that kind of like connections to other people that do the same thing?
I don't know, maybe a little bit of both. I think once you're no longer in the club, it changes the relationship with people who still are. So it's kind of a double whammy in some ways.
It is a hard sell. I mean, the other part too is the next day you're a civilian,
Right.
You're going on a cross-country trip. And now, what I find also with a lot of guys and gals, obviously, if I ever use guys, I mean it in a general sense, not in a sexist way for all of you listening. But, when I see a lot of they lost that loss of identity, then you're like, oh, crap, all the stuff that kind of happened in the last 20 years, 15 years, 25 years, 10 years, doesn't matter really, all comes back and rushes towards you. So we talk about healing, but now again, you have the stigma from the past and now you got to heal, but it's still the stigma from the past. And that kind of like the devil on one side and the angel on the other. How do you deal with all that?
Right. Well, I around the time that let me back up. A couple of years before I retired, I became aware of a type of healing that's maybe not the most conventional, but for some reason felt very drawn to it. And so I started to research and do a really deep dive on psychedelics. And initially my curiosity was just that it was curiosity because this was something I wasn't super familiar with. And it was being presented in a way that was contradictory to what I had always believed about, air quotes, drugs. And so I started to really kind of dig into documentaries and books. And as I got kind of further down that rabbit hole, realized that this was potentially a way to seek healing from that grief that I had carried. And I had lost my father in 2014, so about 10 years before I retired. And I also knew that I hadn't really processed that loss either. So long story short, after I retired, I found my way to an ayahuasca ceremony, primarily because I was seeking healing from grief. But what I found was healing from all of these other things that I didn't understand I was carrying until I had the benefit of hindsight.
Right. I think that the ayahuasca stuff is very controversial, yet I see the good in that. Microdosing is something that I also kind of see being very helpful. And I recently had a client who did a microdose of MDMA, I said, all right, well, you want to try it? Go ahead. And it did wonders for that person. So I think that there's a big stigma. How did you get by the stigma? I mean, you go on ayahuasca to do it in Peru where it really originates, then there's no real stigma. But, stateside, European side, Western culture side, in all reality, they can frown upon that stuff. How do you deal with that stigma?
Right. Yeah. And I actually did it in the United States. I joined a church in South Florida, Central Spiritualista Luz do Vegetal. It's a branch of a Brazilian church. So from the Amazon. I don't know that I cared about the stigma.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't advertise it to a lot of people. In fact, I probably could count on one hand the number of people I told that I was going to pursue this before I did. but now I find myself in this space where I'm speaking very openly about it, trying to tell the story to as many people who will listen, because it's, in fact, I think I would say that my goal now is to help eliminate that stigma, because I think I really strongly feel that it's misunderstood.
If you expect me to argue with you, I'm not. I'm also the type of person, and I know we're talking about ayahuasca, but even for the treatment of sleep at times for first responders, I wish they could take some THC that's more like indica to help them sleep, because it's very harmless. But not taking that before your shift, probably it's not a good idea. But after you
Right.
get some sleep and you're struggling with that, it's a nice natural way, because to me anyway, I see that as an advantage. We worked through a lot of the stigma of the drugs because of the work we do, right? I mean, I'm a civilian, obviously, but I work a lot with substance use, and I worked with the first responder world many, many, many times. How's your journey been convincing people that it's not so bad?
Well, it's surprised me in a number of ways. One of the most surprising things about it has been, as I've become more vocal about this journey and talked to colleagues, many of whom are now retired, what has surprised me the most is how many of them have said, "Can you please tell me more about that? I've been looking into that. I've been looking into going to South America. I've been looking into this type of experience," because, and maybe it's easier to recognize the need to heal after you've stepped away from it. Or maybe it's just because most of the people that I talked to came in the same time frame and are also now retired. I don't know. Maybe there's a correlation there that's not
Probably.
not valid. But so that's been kind of surprising. And the support has been overwhelming. In fact, I don't think anyone that I have talked to about this journey has pushed back that I've done something wrong or unethical, or and just as you said with the use of marijuana for sleep for veterans or whoever, you use the word natural, right? Like, and
Yeah.
people, and I think it's interesting to me that so many people who see these types of modalities as wrong, for lack of a better word, are seemingly okay with all of the pharmaceuticals and the things that come out of labs,
Right.
but opposed to the things that come from nature, when the things that come from the lab are so often a synthetic representation of a natural compound.
Right.
It's almost backwards in some ways.
To me, it is. I agree 100%. I mean, you look at the poppy fields in Afghanistan, you being in Afghanistan for a while. Well, if we put it under the name OxyContin, that's fine. We can do that.
Right.
Otherwise, we got to destroy those poppy fields because they're bad. They're drug addicting.
Yep.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, or just even, take aspirin, for example. Aspirin is a synthetic version of the bark from a willow tree, right? So it's, which is better if you have a headache and you have the option between aspirin or some tea from a piece of bark, like, which one is less likely to have any kind of carcinogens, or I don't know.
Right.
I think it's just the closer you can get to nature, the closer you get to God.
Right. The spiritual side too is so important.
Right.
No, I agree. And, as I tell people, is that sometimes people come in and my first responders don't have much of a choice, but they're like, would you take trazodone or Ambien, or would you rather take a melatonin or some sort of THC that's indica based? Well, you
Right.
know what I'm going to say, right? But I know that my first responder people can't do that second part.
Right.
So, the stigma still needs to be taken care of. But when your healing process, you talked about going to do your ayahuasca down in South Florida. It's been described to me by many, many people of how it goes and how the journey goes, so to speak, about getting there and, sometimes it's a hut, sometimes it's not, and what have you. What was your journey like through the ayahuasca stuff?
Yeah, the church that I joined in South Florida is a beautiful piece of property. It has a temple that's kind of a big wooden gazebo with a white sandy floor, and the ceremonies take place inside that temple. And everyone has a space to put their, kind of their mat so they can lay out and be comfortable. The ceremonies typically last, I think, maybe 6 hours,
Yeah.
start to finish, somewhere in there. And it's not the easiest thing to do. It's, in fact, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life is the healing journey that I've taken with ayahuasca. But it's also been the most profound, I think, thing I've ever experienced.
When you say not easy, what do you mean by that? Because because it's too far down South Florida. I mean, why
No,
is
I
it?
mean the experience itself.
Okay, so
The
explain that.
being
That's kind of where I
being
wanted to lead you to, actually.
yeah, being in the medicine or sacrament is, if you surrender to it. The interesting thing about ayahuasca, and I don't know that this is true for other psychedelics, but you have to be willing to allow it to work within your body and within your mind and within your spirit to have it help you. And the first time that I went and sat with ayahuasca, I had more than double the regular dose, and I had no discernible reaction to it whatsoever because I wasn't willing, my ego was not willing to allow me to be vulnerable in front of a group of complete strangers. And I left that ceremony feeling very disappointed and also unworthy because I hadn't been able to connect to this, this force. And I went back a couple weeks. Well, when that ceremony ended, I went to the facilitator of the ceremony and I said, I don't understand what happened. Most people had maybe 1.5 cups, and I drank 5 cups of it and nothing happened. And I don't understand. And he asked me, he said, do you smoke a lot of marijuana? I said, I've never smoked marijuana, actually. And he said, well, what do you do? What do you do for work? I said, I've recently retired in law enforcement. And the look on his face was just kind of like, uh-huh. Yep. We see this a lot, that the church has done work with veterans. They've done, obviously I'm not the first responder to come through the door. And he said, we often see this with people in military, law enforcement, intelligence circles. You spend so much time training your mind to maintain composure and separate your emotions on the inside from what you're portraying on the outside, that it can be hard to break through that barrier. And I said, but I felt so drawn to this experience that, what do I do now? And he suggested that I come back for a 3-day retreat because the church has one night ceremonies, and then I also do a 3-night over a weekend where you do 3 consecutive ceremonies. And so I did that. I took a couple of months to kind of, regroup and think about what it was I really was after and why I was pursuing it. And I went back a couple months later, and that's when those barriers started to come down, and you have to surrender to it. It's a powerful medicine, but you have to be willing to see what it's going to show you, because it's almost like, in some ways, a mirror, and it's going to show you the truth. And we don't always want to see the truth, and we don't always want to take responsibility for the truth, and it requires that of you. So that's why I say it's the hardest thing I've done. And some of those ceremonies were excruciatingly painful. Like, it's in your head, but I mean, feeling actual physical discomfort and just a battle going on. Some of those first ceremonies, I've done a few, they have gotten easier as I've worked through more of the layers in my head, but some of those first ceremonies were very, very intense, and like a battle was brewing between my ego and ayahuasca. So it's it's not a trip to the park.
Just a quick break. Guys, I'm going to talk about a new product that I really like. I actually bought one of their hoodies. It was amazing, and I really enjoyed wearing it. This episode is going to be supported by Deemed Fit. Deemed Fit is a first responder-owned activewear and leisure brand. And one thing that I genuinely like about them is that they support different causes. I actually gave a few people I know who work with first responders or nonprofits their name to Deemed Fit, and I know they're talking to them. They do a lot of initiatives and collections that are based on mental health for first responders. And if you go there right now and you buy anything, including the mental health support stuff, use the code RDA15. That's right, RDA15 to get 15% off on any products that you get. Again, it's called RDA15. Go to deemedfit.com, DEEMEDFIT.com, and enjoy 15% off at checkout to save. Now, right back to the episode. Well, I will argue that it's not your ego, it's your super ego. Don't do anything. You might break down. You might say something you're not supposed.
Sure.
That's your super ego just telling you all these barriers that got to be in the way. I mean, to me, it's a super ego issue, but
I'll defer to you. You're the expert on that, so I'm not gonna argue with you.
Sorry to go Freudian on your ass here. That's not what my goal was, but here we are, right?
That's you're within your rights to do that.
But I think it's really what, I have a friend of mine who did the ayahuasca, and this person's not on law enforcement. This person does therapy. And the first time they went, they had a similar situation. This was in Pennsylvania. And what that person told me was that I didn't want to say things I'm not supposed to. And I said, well, based on what I know about ayahuasca, and I've never done it personally, so that's my disclosure to everyone, was that the more you create barriers, the less likely it's going to work for you. And it's not there to take away the HIPAA stuff or the security, the national security. It really is about you and what your super ego/ego blocks.
Right.
So I don't know if that's resonating with you, but that's certainly what happened with my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I would agree with that. I think I first had to get to a point where I could allow my ego to kind of step out of the way so that I could get to the healing. And it humbles you, I mean, it's been a very humbling journey.
There's something about, I think that someone once said to me as a law enforcement person, I was there to protect other people. Who's protecting me when I'm going through my treatment, going through my ayahuasca? He was an ayahuasca, but for example, I think the change in role is such a ego-driven thing because now you don't need to protect yourself. You're not protecting anything else. All you have to do is break down those barriers to open up. And that's not an easy task when you're always thinking, I got to save people, I got to help people, I got to protect people.
Right. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but the ego, I think, is while you're on the job, what helps to keep you safe. Like it serves you well, right? It's the thing that allows you to be hypervigilant and have that situational awareness, and in many ways that suspicion and maybe even fear are part of what keep you safe on the job. And so when you start this journey and you start to kind of dismantle those things, it's a big shift in mindset and even worldview.
I think that that's such a good point. I also know that for the ego, it really is about what's my vulnerability going to do to me. And when we grow up, like and we all have different journeys, but we have the different types of issues /traumas whatever you want to call them. And we protect ourselves, we reinterpret it and all that. And that exposure from ayahuasca sometimes is too much for people.
Yes. Yeah. And I've been in retreats where people have not stayed the 3 days.
Because there's
Right?
this.
And I suspect that that's, I mean, I don't know, and I don't know their story, but I think it's sometimes just it's too honest.
I mean, I think that I face it without the ayahuasca when I'm working with people. I'm like, if you're telling me that you're hurting kids or that you're throwing animals over some overpasses, yeah, I'm okay with you being shamed about that. That's fine. Otherwise, there is no shame in anything you're going to say. And most of
Right.
them agree with me, but they're like, yeah, my ego won't let me do it. So I think that,
Right.
when talk therapy cannot be enough, and talk therapy is important. I don't want to play down my job. I think it's important to do that too. But I think that stuff like ayahuasca will have, if as long as you're open to it, will break it down for you.
Right. Right. And that's the key, to
Right.
be willing to surrender to it.
And I would argue that the reason why mental health wise we struggle for our first responder world, particularly law enforcement, is that who really wants to struggle to this guy who's never been in the job, or this woman who's never been in the job? And I get that sometimes. Luckily, I have some experience in the field, so it helps. But I think I tell people, like, yeah, I mean, I've never had schizophrenia, but I know how to treat it. So maybe if you educate me, I'm able to help you too. And
Right.
most of them break the barriers because I use humor a lot. But I think that with people who do not want to do that, those, like, again, I don't know if law enforcement wants to be saying, oh, I'm going to an ayahuasca retreat this weekend, but that certainly is very helpful. Well, I'm sure that you bring that stuff up in your memoir. And your
Oh
memoir,
yeah,
go ahead.
the memoir is a very raw and vulnerable reckoning of my life. So everything that I never told anyone for, 50 years, it's all in there.
Yeah, and just for the record, so national security and the NSA doesn't cup up our ass. Not anything around national security. Thank you very much. Her own journey.
Yeah, well, the State Department had to clear on the manuscript, so I had to.
I figured.
Yeah.
And the NSA is always listening. So, oh, wait a minute. No, they're not. I'm not supposed to say that, apparently. So talk of us, like, the memoir was out on April 15th. So it's what, Amazon, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah, it's available on Amazon. It's available. I have a website, klsadler.com. There are links to it on there as well. And the title is From the Badge to the Vine: Journey Through Duty, Trauma, and Healing. And it's a story of really the last 2 years of my life, which have been on this journey with ayahuasca, but it's not so much about the ceremonies and what happens in the ceremonies. It's more about how those experiences have allowed me to lay down the things that were no longer serving me, to step into, a new chapter of my life, if you will. And now, to my great surprise, to find myself here as an advocate for plant medicine. I mean, talk about doing a 180 from a young police officer who is arresting people for a little bit of marijuana to now advocating for sacred plants. It's not a journey I ever expected to be on, but my hope with the book is that it will help to destigmatize the use of sacred plants for healing. I sincerely believe that these plants exist on this planet for the exact reason that they, I think human beings have been benefiting from these plants for many, many thousands of years. I think that they do exactly what they're designed to do. And so my hope is to destigmatize their use, and also to just help people, especially in the first responder community, recognize that it's okay to admit and accept that the years on the job have had an impact on your soul.
Powerful words had an impact on your soul. I was smiling when you said using things, getting away from things that are not serving me anymore. if I ever say that in any type of department, fire or police, they're gonna roll their eyes and like, listen to that fucking therapist. So it's kind of cool to hear someone say that because that's like, all right, someone else said in the like who works in law
And
enforcement.
it's not something I would have said probably 2 years ago.
But I wonder, that's the question that came up to me. Like, I know it's not in the questions we spoke to, but if I talked to Kemmi 5 years ago and I said, this is where you're going to be writing a book about your journey and what would she have said at that time?
You're out of your damn mind.
I know. I figured that's what she would say to me.
I mean, just the fact that I'm on your show is, it would not have been, I mean, I avoided any kind of speaking engagement. The one test we talked about, wellness test, the one test that I did do multiple times throughout my career, even in the State Department, was personality testing. Myers-Briggs in particular was the one that they used early on. I think now they've shifted to something else, but from for leadership trainings and things to understand, how you might approach a situation differently than someone else, coworker. And the one thing that was always consistent for me on those personality tests was extreme introvert. So just the fact that I'm here now, putting myself out there in the world as an advocate and speaker for this modality is a massive shift from where I would have been 5 years ago.
And that's what's interesting, because if you told me if you were an introvert or an extrovert, I would have called you an extroverted introvert, but not an extreme introvert.
Yeah.
Well, that's absolutely.
It's new.
I don't know. For me, it wasn't, my journey was maybe through therapy, but my journey was like, that's the worst that could happen. People don't like me. I'm used to that stuff. So That's how I've learned to be myself more and more as time goes on. So, I can't fake me. I could. I wish I could, but sometimes I can't fake me. So I think that plays a factor. But while your book is just out, I know that we do record these things slightly in advance. So everyone who's listening to this will be like, wow, she's on her journey right now on her pilgrimage. Well, no, we're recording slightly before that. But would like to talk about your pilgrimage you're going to be taking, because that's an important thing too.
Yes. So I'm going to walk the Camino de Santiago, 780 kilometers from St. Jean Pied de Port in France to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. It's a walk that I wanted to do when I retired, but I was unable to because I had foot surgery shortly before I retired. So I found myself on a very different journey than one we just talked about. And now, 2 years to the day of my retirement, I am going to start making my way to France. And then on the 26th of April, I'm going to start walking, and I'm going to do it with my dog, Nona. And we're calling the pilgrimage Nona's Way. And I'm doing it as a mental health awareness walk for, like we've been saying here, like this journey that I've been on and that my book talks about is not for everybody.
No.
But everybody needs healing. So the purpose of Nona's Way is to draw attention to that need for healing in the first responder community. And so there's a website for that as well, nonasway.com. And she's also on Instagram and has a Facebook page. And
well, I make sure to put that in the show notes. I'm going to put in your website as well as your journey, because I'd like the people to follow you. Like I said, we're recording this slightly in advance from that date, so hopefully the people can go and check out where you're at too, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and I'll be making updates on the Instagram.
Oh, and Instagram, I mean, again, if I met you 5 years ago and said you'd be on Instagram sharing your story, what would you have said to me again?
You'd have gotten the same response.
Well, I still wish I didn't meet you 5 years ago and to see all the progress, because that's the ultimate thing too, is we see our own progress, which is cool. But as a therapist, that's the best thing about my job, is seeing people go from where they were 5 years ago to where they are now. So I get it. And I certainly know my retirees in the 5 year span after their retirement have changed tremendously to where they were prior to that. So I will let you go. Please go follow her journey on Instagram. We'll put out the website and the show notes. Go buy her book. Again, what's the title?
From the Badge to the Vine.
From the Badge to the Vine. I will be getting my copy, and I know you'll be on your way while we're this comes out, but I'll send you my copy, and hopefully when you get back, you can sign it or something.
I would be honored to.
I really appreciate your time, and thank you for sharing so openly, and I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.